Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to admit it. We are in a historic disruption of the global oil economy. The Strait of Hormuz is ungrabbable and a path to victory remains unclear. Meanwhile, Cuba's entire power grid and energy infrastructure is collapsing like an African finding out that his son is gay. I would collapse, ladies and gentlemen. The global economy is bracing for a seismic shift this morning as energy markets are entering what analysts are calling a historic disruption. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway responsible for the passage of one-fifth of the world's oil supply, has become effectively ungrabbable due to its intense naval engagements of Operation Epic Fury with Iranian coastal batteries and swarms of fast attack craft, making the passage a gauntlet of fire. Insurance premiums for tankers have skyrocketed over 900%. Whoa. This has forced a complete halt to traffic through the chasm. I didn't mean to pronounce it like a douche. Chasm. God, why did I say it like that? Sending Brent crude prices screaming toward a record 135 a barrel. God damn. Meanwhile, I'm going to update you on a personal factor. I was heading down to get some gas today, and my goodness, we're looking at $3.39 a gallon. And that's the average. I drove around town a little bit to see if I could find anywhere cheaper, and that is it. $3.39. We are past the $3.09 marker. We've jumped 30 cents since the last time that I think I updated you guys. It's getting... Oof. I'm just gonna, we should start holding our breath a little bit. It's not cheap in Minnesota. It's not cheap in North Dakota. I don't know about anywhere else in the Midwest. I haven't been around lately. But ladies and gentlemen, despite the White House's insistence that the U.S. forces have achieved, quote, operational dominance, the path toward definitive military victory remains frustratingly unclear. While the initial strikes disseminated Iran's traditional command structure and the rise of Mojtaba Khamenei is ushered in, decentralized total war strategy, military experts warn that while the U.S. can win every head-on engagement, the asymmetric, not asymmetric, and doesn't have anything to do with the Jews. Well, it kind of does, Israel. Nature of the conflict, asymmetric, including drone swarms and cyber attacks, is creating a quagmire, not the Family Guy, with no clear exit strategy. The Pentagon's short-term excursion is now entering its third week with no signs of a ceasefire on the horizon. I watch 60 Minutes because I like it. I've always liked it. I used to watch it back in high school and shit like that. I used to watch it on my Chromebook, as they used to call it. You know, back in the day, we had these things called Chromebooks, and half the time they were not given to you. It was only in the later years where they let you take it home and shit like that. Especially during COVID, they had to let you take it home. But I had these things called Chromebooks, and I would open it up and I would play Dr. Phil. I would watch I'd play Friv, I'd watch Dr. Phil, God, that's a better way to say it, and all of those things, and I would just entertain myself. There was this one game where you could, create, a little world if you wanted, or you could, mix elements. It was, lava, water, or then you could, put sulfuric acid, you could put little people. It was like a little game. I can't remember what it was called, but I'd love to be reminded of what it was. But, I would play on my Chromebook, and I would watch 60 Minutes regularly, because even back then, I loved politics, because I got into politics right around the first election I remember being deeply kind of oh, this is interesting in, was Mitt Romney versus Obama. Now, to be fair, I was on surface level. I was on, the news side of it. I was not watching the epic rap battles of history, Mitt Romney v. Obama. If you haven't seen that, it's something else. It's bizarre. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Epic rap battles of history was never a lane I went down as a kid. It was never a serious... I've looked at some nowadays, and I'm like, the Smosh and Rhett and Link collab, that was alright. That was fine. As the Renaissance people, that was alright. That was a cool one. Then the Ninja Turtle side got cringe. And then I'm like, most of the videos just read to me as a peak internet millennials finding themselves hilarious, early 2010s humor. It's fine for the time, but I'm not trying to say hoity-toity this, whatever. I'm literally talking about YouTube comedy. We're not in a deeply serious lane of talk right now. But ladies and gentlemen, In between all of the 2010s stuff I consumed, I had a heavy trenching of news. You know what I mean? I was watching a lot about Mitt Romney's situation. A lot of people didn't like him for whatever reasons. I didn't like him because he was Mormon, quite frankly. That's just the truth. This was around the time I was 9-ish. So yeah, I was like still like Lutheran at the time. I was forced to go to Sunday school, all that bullshit and whatnot. And it's like, admittedly, it's fun to learn the stories because it does inform a lot about the world around us. Religion in and of itself can actually tell you a lot about the way people think. It can tell you a lot about a way that people, even like hundreds of years ago, saw things in the world and whatnot, the observations they made, and how it has rung true to many people throughout history. And some people have misinterpreted the message and used it in horrific ways. Some people have used it to like feed people that have less than them. You know what I mean? Dirty hobos that can't get a job. I'm just kidding. Haha. But that's real. I didn't like him because he was Mormon, but that's perfectly fine. And Barack Obama, I remember I voted for him in a school election. At the time, I believe I was in elementary school, and I voted in the school's little ballot for Barack Obama, and I felt really proud of myself. This was before a close, immediate family member of mine, I'm not going to say who it was to protect their privacy, but it's not anybody that I have talked to in a long bit of time, so I don't think they'll mind me sharing this story. But they were on the phone with, I believe, their boss at the time, and I had, I was at their shoulder, and I was talking about the news and whatnot. I was a little kid. I didn't understand very much, but I was just trying to talk to them about Barack Obama and how he was, going to get a second term. And this person looks at me, and he goes, Barack Obama wants everyone to burn in hell. And then he goes right back to his phone call. He put the phone to his chest, by the way. So there is definitely a chance that the boss had heard him say that. And then he just puts the phone right back to his ear and keeps talking. And then I go, okay. Yeah, he has a colorful view of this gentleman. And admittedly, you know what I mean? You can have your issues with Obama. I certainly admit that he is, I would say he is Bush light. He is a lighter version of the Bush era policies. He is a continuation of, underground prisons and things like that, Abu Ghraib type situations, drone attacks, and admittedly, policy. You know what I mean? We were sitting unpretty with Russia by the end. We were sitting unpretty with North Korea by the end. We were sitting unpretty with a lot of other nations around the world. It was not a great era of peace. You know what I mean? We encouraged a coup in Ukraine. We had a national director having a kill list made every Tuesday where they would go and kill foreign or domestic United States citizens that they considered to be threats to the country every single week, and they would meet every Tuesday. It was called the Tuesday Morning Kill List. John Brennan, I believe, was the person who threw it together during the Obama administration, and this was just a routine thing that Obama had made. It was discontinued eventually by Trump, and then this just was a routine practice. What I'm trying to say is that you can have your reasons for disliking Obama. I remember I liked him as a kid. But anyways, there's definitely things to criticize, as there is with every president. God, we're getting to Trump. God, that's the original point of this. Gas prices are ridiculous right now. We're gonna cover this 60 Minutes guy. He spoke up. Who is this guy again? I forget completely. Bob McNally, former White House energy advisor to the second Bush administration. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear exactly what he has to say.
The all-time high for the most consumers have ever paid for gasoline was in the summer of 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine. It was a $5 per gallon average. If we don't open up Hormuz soon, I can see us making new records.
We could be looking at the highest gas prices ever paid in this country.
If we don't open Hormuz to the free flow of traffic, yes.
It's not just gas prices. The cost of jet and diesel fuel has risen 25%.
What I imagine.
As a result, higher plane tickets and grocery prices are expected to follow.
The gasoline we pay for at the pump, the price of that gasoline is set in a global oil market. A supply disruption anywhere leads to a price spike for consumers everywhere, including here.
We're seeing this trickle-down effect?
We are. So
$8, I believe someone saw in California. I thought I had a clip of it pulled, but maybe I will later. It was someone recording a gas station in, I believe it was just Northern California or something like that, somewhere outside of Oakland. I don't know. And they recorded $8 20 something cents, I think. It was $8, maybe 2 cents. I believe maybe the numbers got switched in my head. I don't want to be a fake news reporter. So I could be wrong in that instance. People should research it, but I believe I know that it has climbed above $8 in certain areas.
When that mom in Des Moines goes to the store to buy food for her family, that food was grown with and transported by oil. And as those producers and growers of food react to and absorb these price increases, they'll be passed along to the consumer, to that mom in the store.
So what's happening at the Strait of Hormuz today affects the entire supply chain?
It does.
Well, yeah, that's kind of a no shit order. You know what I mean? It's of course, as the Middle East is burning, separate humanitarian crises are happening. Across the Gulf. We're going to cover that later, but I'm going to play you this one more clip of the 60 Minutes because this guy, he is predicting the worst case scenario. I would say the worst case scenario is 40% likely to happen. I'm saying 60% of a chance we still make it out of this lightly. You know what I mean? I'm saying that there's a chance that we make it. So you're saying there's a chance. I am. That we make it out of this unscathed. And by unscathed, I mean with maybe tens of Americans dead at the very minimum. You know what I mean? That's at the very... I'm just trying to be realistic here. We're already at a death count of over almost hitting 10. I'm just being honest here. We need to accept the fact that a lot more people are probably going to die before we get out of this. I don't think that is tolerable. I don't think it's okay, but it's something that we just have to remember as people talking about this seriously.
Give it to me straight. What is the worst case scenario that you are predicting here?
I'm predicting that this is going to get worse before it gets better. This is going to be a longer and costlier conflict than just about everybody expected.
You have said that a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a guaranteed global recession. Do you still stand by that?
Look, yes, the world economy cannot grow without 20% of its energy supply, period.
Rarely do we recognize history in the making. But is that what we are witnessing right now? We're sitting in the middle of an unprecedented time?
Yes, we are experiencing, just as a factual matter, the biggest energy disruption in history.
Man.
We have to just hope and pray that it doesn't go on for too much longer.
All right. If that's the best you got to inspire hope in us. If you're curious, I was curious about this as well. Why can't we just go in there and, as me and the Paul brothers would term it, boss up? Why can't we just do that? Why can't we go in there and just, kill everybody? And then take the Strait of Hormuz for ourselves? Well, Andrew Chang explains why that might be a little bit more difficult than we'd imagine.
Why can't the U.S. just take over the Strait of Hormuz? You'd think it would be relatively easy for the world's most powerful navy to conquer this tiny but critical waterway that's only 30-odd kilometers across at one point, so they can finally get Middle East oil flowing back out to the world again. But no, it's not that easy.
Attention all ships from now on. All navigating through the Strait of Hormuz is forbidden.
For starters, imagine putting an American warship directly in harm's way, right in the highly predictable, tightly confined kill box that is the Strait of Hormuz. Unlike in open water, it would be attackable not just by air and by sea, but also by land, where a rocket or missile strike could be launched from mere kilometers away. That might give any defender only seconds, not necessarily minutes, and certainly not hours to react. And what if the U.S. were to lose or sustain heavy damage to a warship in the Strait? Two problems. First, that's a multi-billion-dollar loss, heaped on top of however many injuries and deaths, for a country that has a very low tolerance for loss.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I have found that explanations lacking.
6 American families must now lay to rest their sons and daughters. And for what?
But also, let's say you lose any ship. An oil tanker is damaged or destroyed, loses propulsion somehow. How do you safely clear the lane? What good is a trade route that's also a war zone? And is it really feasible to protect thousands of ships a month? Because remember, all that oil is stuck on all those tankers, not because they can't pass through. It's because they don't want to. The risk of losing even one ship is too high, and insurance companies refuse to eat the potential loss of hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars if things go sideways.
Insurance companies have been really quickly scaling down the level of insurance they have, the kinds of insurance they have, and in some cases, the insurance policy.
So they, Los Angeles fired these people. They basically said, we're going to cancel your insurance early so that you can burn, and then we won't have to cover you, like a little bit, even a bit. We're going to cancel your policy because that just, it's better for us. And that's chill.
Entirely.
The problem the world has right now is that, as beaten and battered as Iran may be, according to the U.S. Secretary of War,
the mullahs are desperate and scrambling.
the fact of the matter is that Iran wouldn't need very many successes to put a complete stop to commercial shipping. It knows to be effective, it doesn't actually have to control the strait. It just has to make it too dangerous for anyone else to use.
They just have to delay everybody. That's a great idea. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're also like me, you're worried about the fact that we're probably going to lose the dollar over this, and CNN seemingly is starting to agree with us.
What is the fate of the petrodollar? A senior Iranian official told CNN that Tehran is considering allowing some vessels to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, with one caveat, that all transactions for cargo, that includes oil, are settled in Chinese yuan and not the US dollar. Such a move would circumvent the decades-old petrodollar used by oil-exporting countries to settle transactions. The petrodollar is a major reason why the US dollar is the world's reserve currency and also helps maintain dominance of the United States by creating more demand for US dollars. The petrodollar system dates back to 1974, when Saudi Arabia agreed to sell its oil in US dollars, helping stabilize the US economy after the Vietnam War and the end of the gold standard.
One of the worst mistakes we made as a country, ending the gold
Sanctioned
standard.
oil producers like Russia, Iran, and until recently Venezuela challenged the petrodollar, opting to use other currencies. Iran's effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz, that normally handles around 20% of global oil and gas supply, has caused what the International Energy Agency says the largest disruption in the history of global oil markets. If Tehran moves forward with this plan, it could further weaponize one of the world's most critical energy choke points, not only militarily, but also financially, experts say. It's caused energy prices worldwide to skyrocket, and we've even seen prices of things like fertilizer, jet fuel, and polymers increase. But a new risk has emerged. Could the world be moving towards a petro-yuan? De-dollarization has been debated for years, with President Trump warning BRICS, the coalition of emerging nations, against abandoning the US dollar. If Iran continues to keep a tight grip on the Strait of Hormuz, would countries consider switching to trading in yuan, a currency of one of Iran's key allies? That could be consequential and could affect the fate of the petrodollar.
We're probably going to lose it. I'm in all honesty, unfortunately. I don't think we're going to be the standard bearer anymore. But, only time will tell if this is a unfortunate indicator for the future. As the Middle East burns, we're going to cover the Cuba international... the national power grid suffering a total collapse, leaving the island's 11 million residents in complete darkness. They, if you don't know, have been having rolling blackouts for a while. As a matter of fact, they've been having a lot of issues. They've been having so many troubles. There's TikTok videos that you can watch where a man, he cooks breakfast every morning, and he says, "Today I had power for 3 hours, and I had to cook this eggs and whatnot. And then it's hard to find eggs. You can actually barely find, because the grocery stores are not. The government is not reporting that there is a shortage of food and that there's no gas and that the cars, as a result, they can't drive anywhere and the streets are empty and there's garbage piling up everywhere." And he shows video footage. You can find it actually in areas that are unrestricted. It's the failure, if you don't know, has been triggered by the critical fuel shortage linked directly to the disruption of Venezuelan oil shipments. If you don't know about this, They have been relying on the oil shipments from Venezuela because, unfortunately for them, the Soviet Union's collapse left them in an absolute crisis. If you're old enough to remember, they had a situation where after their main oil supplier at the time and energy supplier in general, the USSR, collapsed, they were not able to rely on those shipments anymore. They had a situation. And then eventually, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela took power. And then he was like, hey, I'm going to foster relations to where we can be your supplier now. So we can keep your pseudo-communist experiment continuing or whatever. That was the plan eventually from there. And then they have been rerouted, seized amidst the global chaos, with Antonio Gutierrez power plant offline and no immediate way to secure emergency shipments. Hospitals are now running on dwindling generator reserves, and the Cuban government has been forced to suspend all non-essential services indefinitely. Very not fun. Let's look at this video from Patrick Oppman, reporting from Havana.
The entire island of Cuba is in a blackout at the moment. It's the first time this has taken place since the Trump administration placed a total oil embargo on this island. And the concern is, although we've had island-wide blackouts in the past, is whether or not Cuba could get the power back on. What happens typically when you have a blackout in a province or in part of this island, they were able to essentially jumpstart those electrical grids using other electrical grids where they've not lost power. When you have an island-wide blackout like this, 10 million people in the dark at this moment, it gets much harder to do that. And on top of this, you have no oil coming into this island for the last 3 months, ever since the Trump administration began this pressure campaign trying to get Cuba to open up economically and politically. You're also dealing with a failing infrastructure, and an infrastructure the Cuban government has not invested in years, despite the fact that power outages have become more and more common. So already over the last few days, we were seeing blackouts that sometimes could last most of the day, an entire day. In one small town in eastern Cuba, people actually rose up.
Moron, yes. Moron? I don't know how to pronounce it. March 14th, they had a storming of the, what's it called?
That attacked the Communist Party headquarters.
There you go.
It's obviously something the Cuban government does not put up with here. And so people were arrested, people have been threatened before going out into the street and banging pots and pans, calling on their government to turn back on power. The government here blames the U.S., blames the Trump administration, but has said in recent days that they're willing to negotiate an end to this crisis. It's not clear if they have time to at the moment because the situation here gets worse and worse by the day. And increasingly, when you talk to Cubans, they say they feel they have nothing left to lose.
That is not a people that are going to be tolerating this for very much longer. This is actually a very, I caught this video and I want to share it with people because I believe that it explains things in a very succinct, stupendous way, that is good, just going to make things a lot clearer.
For 60 years, the Cuban regime has survived every crisis thrown at it. But this time, it might actually collapse. The island is running out of electricity, fuel, and food. And the regime may be entering the worst crisis since the revolution. Its people are starving, living off of 2 hours of electricity each day, and the Cuban economy is in shambles. 83% of the population now lives in serious abject poverty. The minimum wage is barely $15 per month. And that's not even enough to buy a carton of eggs. And the thing is, even finding a carton of eggs to buy is basically impossible. There are widespread shortages of basic foods, and the constant power outages leave the population with only 2 or 3 hours of electricity per day. Without electricity, there are no refrigerators or freezers, which means that there's no way to store food. Cubans are, and this is not an exaggeration, living in day-to-day survival mode. To make matters worse, there's almost no fuel left on the island. The streets are empty because there's no gasoline to fill up cars. Garbage is piling up in the streets, and public transportation has all but collapsed. In recent weeks, protests have begun appearing across the island, often at night during the blackouts, when people are banging pots and pans in the streets to demand electricity and food. In the city of Moron, protesters even attacked the Communist Party headquarters and set parts of the building on fire. By almost every account, this is the worst crisis the country has experienced since the Cuban regime came to power in 1959. Now, many of you may look at the misery in Cuba today and immediately assume that the explanation is obvious. the U.S. embargo. And there's no question that U.S. sanctions make things worse, but the truth is that the roots of the Cuba crisis go much deeper than that, because for decades, the Cuban economy has never truly sustained itself. Instead, it survived thanks to foreign patrons. During the Cold War, Cuba was sustained by the Soviet Union, which supplied the island with massive shipments of subsidized oil. In exchange, Cuba exported products like sugar and tobacco into the Soviet economic bloc. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, those oil shipments suddenly stopped. The result was an acute economic crisis that became known as el periodo especial, or the special period. For almost a decade, Cuba struggled to survive. That is, until Hugo Chavez came to power in Venezuela. As you may know, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, and Chavez's close relationship to Fidel Castro led him to send hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil per day to Cuba, essentially for free. The oil kept the Cuban system alive for the next 2 decades. But now, that lifeline has disappeared, Nicolas Maduro is gone, and the oil shipments from Venezuela have stopped. For the first time in decades, Cuba is facing a crisis, and there's no foreign power willing to rescue it. And that's why the situation in Cuba today looks very different from the crises the regime has faced before. Because this time, there may be no one left to keep the system alive. But there's another factor that is making the situation dramatically worse. And it has to do with the new strategy that the United States under Donald Trump is now using in Latin America. You can go to my profile and watch part 2 if you're interested in understanding.
You can go to his profile. It is in the description, ladies and gentlemen. If you're Cuban, light fires. That is probably, like, I'm not saying to go protest and light fires. I'm saying light fires in your homes. And then, you know what I mean? Make sure that there's plenty of ventilation. But if you don't have heat, if you don't have all that sort of stuff, you got to go old school. You got to chop down trees. You got to do whatever it takes to keep the babies warm. You got to do whatever it takes. You got to, you know what I mean? I'm talking about the truth of survival here, ladies and gentlemen. You have to be willing to do some shit. You have to be willing to go out there and kill. What do you have? Deer down there? I think you do. You have deer type animals. You have maybe capybara. I'm just kidding. Maybe like rodent type animals. You can find those things. You have to go a little medieval when your country is struggling a little bit. It sucks and it's not very fun. But ladies and gentlemen, we can't cover it all, unfortunately. You know.